He walked into his own dealership dressed like an average customer, hoping to see how people would treat him. They mocked him, ignored him, and sent him to the pre-owned lot. That was until he made one phone call that turned everything around. The showroom smelled of polished leather and fresh coffee. Soft jazz played through hidden ceiling speakers, blending with the low hum of quiet conversations and the soft clicking of expensive shoes on marble floors. Jonathan Rhys stood near a shiny silver coupe, gently touching its smooth, aerodynamic curves. He wasn't in a rush. He had time, but the employees didn't seem to think he was worth any of theirs. A young salesman dressed in a sharp navy suit glanced his way, quickly sizing him up. Jonathan's simple polo and jeans did nothing to spark his interest. The salesman barely hid his indifference. With a slight shake of his head, he turned away and walked toward a couple stepping out of a luxury SUV. Jonathan let out a quiet breath, amused by the situation, but his amusement faded as he realized that not one employee had acknowledged him. He leaned against the car, watching as a man in a tailored suit strolled in, adjusting his gold cufflinks. Instantly, the sales team jumped into action, welcoming him, offering him a glass of champagne, and inviting him to the VIP showroom. The man chuckled, nodding, while the employees scrambled to serve him. Jonathan folded his arms. It wasn't the service that bothered him. It was the stark contrast. 30 minutes, that's how long he had been standing there, watching and waiting. Finally, he decided to test something. He stepped toward the reception desk and offered a polite smile. "Excuse me." The receptionist, a woman in her late 20s with sleek, straightened hair and a detached professionalism, barely glanced at him. "Sales reps are busy," she said flatly. "You can wait outside if you're just looking." Jonathan tilted his head, confused. She continued typing, disinterested. "Yes, sir. We try to keep the showroom clear for serious buyers. We can schedule an appointment if you're actually interested in purchasing." Her words weren't just dismissive, they were judgmental. Jonathan's grip tightened on the desk's edge. His patience was long, but this was getting out of hand. Before he could respond, an older salesman with salt and pepper hair and a name tag that read Ron approached. He didn't smile or offer a greeting. "Sir, this dealership caters to a certain clientele," he said, his eyes briefly scanning Jonathan's scuffed sneakers before meeting his gaze again. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" Jonathan met his stare. "Are you?" Ron's face tightened, irritation flashing for a moment before he forced a tight-lipped smile. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at our pre-owned lot. We have excellent financing options, if that's a concern." Jonathan let the insult hang in the air between them. He could feel the eyes of other employees on him now, not because they wanted to help, but because they wanted him to leave. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was deliberate. He nodded slowly as though considering their words. He glanced back toward the well-dressed customer, now sipping champagne, while a salesman practically polished his shoes with compliments. Jonathan exhaled, reaching into his pocket for his phone. He scrolled through his contacts, found the number he was looking for, and pressed call. It rang twice before a deep voice answered. "I need you here now." Jonathan ended the call and slipped his phone back into his pocket. The employees had no idea who they had just dismissed, but they were about to find out. Jonathan Rhys hadn't always been someone people ignored. Growing up in Cincinnati, Ohio, he learned the value of hard work, the way most kids in his neighborhood did, by necessity. His mother worked double shifts as a nurse, and his father ran a small auto repair shop that barely stayed afloat. By the time Jonathan was 15, he spent his weekends under the hoods of old cars, learning how engines worked, how transmissions carried weight, and how a well-tuned machine could command respect just by the sound of its idle. But cars weren't the only thing he learned about. He learned about perception, the way people judged others before a single word was spoken. His father had a client, Mr. Dawson, a well-off businessman who always pulled up in a spotless black Cadillac. Jonathan remembered how differently people treated him, offering him the best seat, rushing to serve him, laughing a little too hard at his jokes. But one day Mr. Dawson came in wearing work clothes, his Cadillac in the shop, driving a rusted pickup, and suddenly he wasn't Mr. Dawson anymore. He was just another guy. By the time Jonathan was 25, he had saved enough to open a small used car dealership. He ran it with one rule: every customer gets treated the same, whether they drive a Bentley or a busted Honda. People respected that. His business grew. By 30, he had expanded across 3 states. By 42, he was the owner of one of the most successful luxury automotive chains in the country. And yet, he never changed the way he dressed or flaunted his wealth, because to him, it was never about the money. It was about the principle, which was exactly why he stood in one of his own dealerships, dressed in a simple polo and jeans, being treated as though he didn't belong. This wasn't the first time he had done this. Jonathan had made it a habit to visit his businesses unannounced, always as a regular customer. It was his way of keeping people honest. After all, anyone could put on a show for the boss. What mattered was how they acted when they thought no one was watching. And right now, they were failing that test. Standing near the reception desk while the sales team continued to ignore him, Jonathan reflected on how easily these employees dismissed people like him. How many others had walked in and been treated like this? How many potential customers had been pushed away simply because they didn't look the part? He glanced toward the man in the suit again, still receiving royal treatment. Then back at the employees who had told him to wait outside. Jonathan had built this empire on respect, and in the next few minutes he was going to remind them why that mattered. He stayed silent, letting the moment stretch. The employees had already dismissed him, assuming he was just another window shopper wasting their time. But then a man in a dark blue suit entered, adjusting his gold cufflinks on his crisp white sleeves. Instantly, the energy in the room shifted. 3 salesmen perked up, their conversations cutting short as they rushed to greet him with practiced enthusiasm. "Good afternoon, sir. What brings you in today? We just got a new shipment of imports, might be exactly what you're looking for. Would you like a glass of champagne while we discuss options?" Jonathan watched as the man smirked, clearly enjoying the attention. He hadn't even said a word yet, but the staff had already decided this man belonged here. A young salesman, barely in his 20s, glanced at Jonathan before lowering his voice to his coworker. "You can always tell who's serious and who's just killing time." Jonathan pretended not to hear. He took a slow step toward one of the sports cars on display, a sleek jet black convertible with a sticker price of $320,000. He reached for the door handle, but a sharp voice cut through the air. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you not to touch that." It was Ron, the older salesman who had barely spared him a glance earlier. "We keep the showroom cars pristine for customers who are serious about buying," Ron continued, his voice firm. "If you're just looking, I can direct you to something more accessible." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "Accessible?" Ron's smile was tight. "We have a pre-owned section a few miles down the road. Lower payments, better financing options." Jonathan let the words sink in. They weren't suggestions. They were dismissals. He glanced back at the well-dressed man in the suit, now sitting comfortably inside a brand-new vehicle, running his hands over the leather-wrapped steering wheel, while a salesman detailed the car's features with practiced enthusiasm. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Jonathan turned back to Ron. "Let me get this straight. You haven't asked if I have an appointment, haven't asked what I do for a living, haven't asked if I'm here to buy. Yet, you've already decided I don't belong here." Ron didn't flinch. "Sir, We cater to a very specific clientele. You understand? Jonathan smiled. I think I do. Ron nodded, mistaking Jonathan's calm demeanor for acceptance. But Jonathan wasn't accepting anything. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number. It rang twice before he spoke. I need you here, he said simply. Now. Then he hung up. The employees had no idea what was about to happen, but they were about to find out. Jonathan tucked his phone back into his pocket, his expression unreadable. The employees went back to ignoring him, their attention still on the well-dressed man who was now laughing as he accepted a glass of champagne from a grinning salesman. Ron, satisfied that Jonathan had gotten the message, turned away without another word. Jonathan exhaled slowly, glancing toward the glass doors. And then it happened. A sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up to the entrance, its polished body reflecting the afternoon sun. The car was impeccable, the kind of machine that only a select few could afford. The valet rushed forward to open the rear door, and a tall man in a charcoal suit stepped out. His presence immediately commanded attention. He adjusted his cufflinks, scanning the room through the glass before pushing open the doors. The showroom fell silent. Employees who had spent the last hour ignoring Jonathan were now standing up straighter, smoothing their suits, adjusting their ties. Ron, the salesman who had suggested Jonathan check out the pre-owned lot, visibly stiffened. The suited man walked with purpose, his leather shoes tapping against the marble floor. Then he locked eyes with Jonathan and smiled. Every employee in the room watched in confusion as the man crossed the showroom floor, not toward the well-dressed customer they had been doting on, but straight to Jonathan. Sir, the man said, his tone respectful, apologies for the delay. Jonathan nodded, his demeanor calm, as though nothing unusual was happening. But the employees looked as if they had just seen a ghost. Ron took a hesitant step forward, his confusion quickly morphing into panic. I'm sorry, he stammered, addressing the suited man. I don't believe we've met. The man turned toward Ron, his face unreadable. I'm David Langford, regional manager. His voice was calm, but carried weight. And I believe you're the one I'm here to see. The atmosphere in the showroom shifted dramatically. Ron's face drained of color, and the other employees froze, their eyes darting between Jonathan and David, trying to piece together what was happening. Jonathan let the silence stretch, then spoke, his voice cool and deliberate. So tell me, he said, this is how we treat people here? The words hit with the force of a hammer. The sales staff stumbled over themselves, desperately trying to explain. Sir, we didn't realize. This is all a misunderstanding. But there was no misunderstanding. The damage was done, and now it was time for consequences. The air inside the showroom went from polished confidence to pure anxiety. Ron swallowed hard, his hands twitching at his sides as he struggled to process the situation. David Langford, the regional manager, had just walked in and greeted Jonathan like an old friend. The other employees stood frozen, their smiles gone, their postures straightening. Even the receptionist, who had barely glanced at Jonathan when he first spoke, was now staring at him like he had transformed into someone entirely different. Jonathan said nothing at first, allowing the tension to build, his gaze moving over each of them, calm, composed, unreadable. Then, in a dangerously even voice, he asked a simple question. This is how we treat people here? Ron's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked around at his co-workers, as if waiting for someone to jump in and save him. No one did. David didn't speak either. He simply folded his hands in front of him, watching the sales team like a principal waiting for an explanation. Ron tried to force a nervous laugh. Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. Oh, a misunderstanding. Ron nodded quickly, grasping at anything that might help him escape the situation. Absolutely. You see, we deal with a very particular clientele here. We try to ensure the best experience for. Jonathan cut him off with a quiet chuckle. A particular clientele? Ron hesitated, realizing too late that he had just dug himself deeper. The showroom felt smaller now. The champagne glasses, the spotless cars, the crisp suits, it all seemed meaningless in the weight of the moment. Jonathan turned his head slightly, looking toward the well-dressed man still lounging inside the luxury car. How much attention did this man get when he walked in? Jonathan asked, but no one answered. He shifted his eyes back to Ron. And how much did I get? Ron fidgeted, his face turning a shade redder by the second. Look, sir, we didn't know. You didn't know who I was? Jonathan finished for him. He nodded slowly, letting the truth settle over the room. Then, turning toward David, he asked, Tell me, how much do we make in sales at this location? David didn't hesitate. This dealership brings in roughly $28 million annually. Jonathan looked back at the stunned employees. That's $28 million, he repeated, and yet some of you have decided for yourselves who is and isn't worth your time. No one breathed. Jonathan stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and Ron. Not in a threatening way, but in a way that made it clear he was in control. Ron visibly shrank. What would have happened? Jonathan asked if I had really been just another customer. What if I had been someone looking to spend $500,000 today? Would you have let that money walk out the door? Ron had no answer, but Jonathan didn't need one. The damage was done, and now the reckoning was about to begin. Silence suffocated the showroom. No one dared to speak, move, or even shift under Jonathan's gaze. Ron's confidence had completely evaporated, and the other employees weren't much better, stiff, wide-eyed, waiting for the inevitable. Jonathan exhaled slowly, shaking his head, disappointed but not surprised. David finally spoke, his tone sharp and professional. Mr. Rhys, how would you like to proceed? Ron's head snapped up, his face draining of color. Mr. Rhys? There was no denying it anymore. No backpedaling, no recovering. The man they had mocked, dismissed, and pushed aside wasn't just any customer. He was the owner. Jonathan looked around at the employees who had spent the last hour treating him like he didn't belong. Then, in a low but firm voice, he said, I want names. David nodded immediately. I already have them. The weight of that statement sent a ripple of panic through the staff. The receptionist's hands clenched into fists at her sides. The younger salesman, who had whispered about who was serious and who was just killing time, looked like he was about to pass out. And Ron, he was still shaking his head, trying to salvage the moment. Sir, please, Ron started, stepping forward. We made a mistake. We were just trying to keep things running smoothly. Jonathan raised a hand, and Ron stopped speaking immediately. I've been in this business for almost 20 years, Jonathan said, his voice calm but holding undeniable authority. And in that time, I've learned something very simple. Respect doesn't cost a damn thing. The words landed like a punch. Jonathan continued, his tone steady yet heavier than if he had yelled. You all looked at me and made a decision, he said. You assumed I wasn't worth your time. You assumed I couldn't afford to be here, and you treated me like I was beneath you. He let those words sink in before adding, and if you did that to me, I can only imagine how many actual customers you've done it to. There was no defense. No one could argue because Jonathan was right. David turned to the staff, his face blank, his voice void of sympathy. Effective immediately, he said. Everyone involved in today's incident is terminated. The words hit like a hammer. Ron's mouth dropped open. Wait, you can't. This is not up for discussion. David interrupted. We don't run our business like this. The younger salesman took a step back, as if trying to physically escape what was unfolding. The receptionist looked like she was holding back tears. Ron tried again, desperation creeping into his voice. Please, this was just a misunderstanding. We didn't mean. You didn't mean what? Jonathan asked, his expression unreadable. Didn't mean to get caught? Ron had no response. Jonathan sighed, running a hand over his jaw. He had seen enough. He turned to David. Make sure the rest of the team gets a company-wide memo, he said. David nodded immediately. Absolutely. Jonathan glanced around one last time, giving a final look at the people who had judged him so quickly. Then, in a tone so quiet, it cut deeper than any raised voice, he left them with one final statement. This isn't about the money. It never was. He let that settle, then added, it's about respect. With that, he turned and walked toward the exit. Behind him, the weight of their failure settled in, and for those left standing, a lesson had been learned the hard way. Jonathan stepped outside, the warm afternoon air washing over him as he adjusted the cuff of his sleeve. The weight of what had just transpired inside the showroom didn't linger on him. It wasn't his burden to carry. Through the glass doors, he could see the aftermath unfolding. Ron stood paralyzed, his mouth still slightly open as if his brain refused to accept reality. The younger salesman had slumped against the counter, silent and stunned. The receptionist had turned away, covering her face with one trembling hand. And David, he was already making calls, ensuring Jonathan's orders were carried out. A valet rushed forward, startled when he recognized Jonathan. Sir, can I get your car for you? Jonathan turned, glancing at him. Unlike the others, this young man hadn't looked down on him. He had done his job. No arrogance, no bias. Jonathan reached into his pocket, pulling out a $100 bill. You handled yourself well today. The valet hesitated, his eyes darting toward the dealership. I thank you, sir, he said. I just treat everyone the same. Jonathan smiled faintly. That's exactly why you'll go far. The valet nodded, quickly stepping back as a black Mercedes-Maybach S680 pulled up to the curb. The driver, a man in his 50s wearing a sharp navy suit, stepped out and opened the door. Mr. Rhys, he said with a small nod. Jonathan slid into the back seat. The soft leather molded around him as the door closed. He looked back one last time at the dealership, at the faces that had judged him. The panic was now setting in. Some lessons were learned the easy way. Others came at a cost. The Maybach pulled away, blending into the smooth flow of traffic. Inside the car, Jonathan leaned back, exhaling through his nose. This wasn't about revenge. It never had been. It was about setting a standard, because if people only respect wealth when they can see it, then they don't respect people at all. And in his business, that kind of mindset had no place. Respect isn't something you reserve for the people you think are important. It's something you give to everyone, Jonathan thought. Because in the end, you never know who you're really talking to. If you believe in treating people with fairness, regardless of their background, drop a comment below. Have you ever experienced something like this? Share your story. Let's keep this conversation going. And if you want more stories like this, hit that subscribe button, because the best lessons come from real moments like these.